Connie said he sounded as if he were reciting everything from memory. Then there is the case of Robert Richardson, of Toledo, Ohio, who in July 1967 informed the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization (APRO) that he had collided with a UFO while driving at night. Coming around a bend, he had been confronted by a strange object blocking the road. Unable to halt in time, he had hit it, though not very hard. Immediately on impact, the UFO vanished. Police who accompanied Richardson to the scene could find only his own skid marks as evidence, but on a later visit, Richardson himself found a small lump of metal which might have come from the UFO. 3 days later, at 11 p.m., 2 men in their 20s appeared at Richardson's home and questioned him for about 10 minutes. They did not identify themselves, and Richardson, to his own subsequent surprise, did not ask who they were. They were not unfriendly, gave no warnings, and just asked questions. He noted that they left in a black 1953 Cadillac. The number, when checked, was found not yet to have been issued. A week later, Richardson received a second visit from 2 different men who arrived in a current model Dodge. They wore black suits and were dark complexioned. Although one spoke perfect English, the second had an accent, and Richardson felt there was something vaguely foreign about them. At first, they seemed to be trying to persuade him that he had not hit anything at all, but then they asked for the piece of metal. When he told them it had gone for analysis, they threatened him, "If you want your wife to stay as pretty as she is, then you'd better get the metal back." The existence of the metal was known only to Richardson and his wife, and to 2 senior members of APRO. Seemingly, the only way the strangers could have learned of its existence would be by tapping either his or APRO's telephone. There was no clear connection between the 2 pairs of visitors, but what both had in common was access to information that was not freely and publicly available. Then there is a case where a man had supposedly taken a shot at a humanoid. One inclement evening in November 1961, Paul Miller and 3 companions were returning home to Minot, North Dakota, after a hunting trip when what they could only describe as a luminous silo landed in a nearby field. At first, they thought it was a plane crashing, but had to revise their opinion when the plane abruptly vanished. As the hunters drove off, the object reappeared, and 2 humanoids emerged from it. Miller panicked and fired at one of the creatures, apparently wounding it. The other hunters immediately fled. On their way back to Minot, all of them experienced a blackout and lost 3 hours. Terrified, they decided not to report the incident to anyone. Yet the next morning, when Miller reported to work in an airfield, they said they were government officials, but showed no credentials, and remarked unpleasantly that they hoped Miller was telling the truth about the UFO. How did they know about it? "We have a report," they said vaguely. "They seemed to know everything about me, where I worked, my name, everything else," Miller said. They also asked questions about his experiences as if they already knew the answers. Miller did not dare tell his story for several years. In September 1976, Dr. Herbert Hopkins, a 58-year-old doctor and hypnotist, was acting as consultant on an alleged UFO teleportation case in Maine, USA. One evening, when his wife and children had gone out leaving him alone, the telephone rang and a man identifying himself as vice president of the New Jersey UFO Research Organization asked if he might visit Dr. Hopkins that evening to discuss certain details of the case. Dr. Hopkins agreed. At the time, it seemed the natural thing to do. He went to the back door to switch on the light so that his visitor would be able to find his way from the parking lot, but while he was there, he noticed the man already climbing the porch steps. "I saw no car, and even if he did have a car, he could not have possibly gotten to my house that quickly from any phone," Hopkins later commented in delayed astonishment. At the time, Dr. Hopkins felt no particular surprise as he admitted his visitor. The man was dressed in a black suit, with black hat, tie and shoes, and a white shirt. "I thought, he looks like an undertaker," Hopkins later said. His clothes were immaculate, suit unwrinkled, trousers sharply creased. When he took off his hat, he revealed himself as completely hairless, not only bald but without eyebrows or eyelashes. His skin was dead white, his lips bright red. In the course of their conversation, he happened to brush his lips with his gray suede gloves, and the doctor was astonished to see that his lips were smeared and that the gloves were stained with lipstick. It was only afterwards, however, that Dr. Hopkins reflected further on the strangeness of his visitor's appearance and behavior. Particularly odd was the fact that his visitor stated that his host had 2 coins in his pocket. It was indeed the case. He then asked the doctor to put one of the coins in his hand and to watch the coin, not himself. As Hopkins watched, the coin seemed to go out of focus and then gradually vanished. "Neither you nor anyone else on this plane will ever see that coin again," the visitor told him. After talking a little while longer on general UFO topics, Dr. Hopkins suddenly noticed that the visitor's speech was slowing down. The man then rose unsteadily to his feet and said, very slowly, "My energy is running low, must go now, goodbye." He walked falteringly to the door and descended the outside steps uncertainly, one at a time. Dr. Hopkins saw a bright light shining in the driveway, bluish-white and distinctly brighter than a normal car lamp. At the time, however, he assumed it might be the stranger's car, although he neither saw nor heard it. Later, when Dr. Hopkins' family had returned, they examined the driveway and found marks that could not have been made by a car because they were in the center of the driveway, where the wheels could not have been. But the next day, although the driveway had not been used in the meantime, the marks had vanished. Dr. Hopkins was very much shaken by the visit, particularly when he reflected on the extraordinary character of the stranger's conduct. Not surprisingly, he was so scared that he willingly complied with his visitor's instruction, which was to erase the tapes of the hypnotic sessions he was conducting with regard to his current case, and to have nothing further to do with the investigation. Subsequently, curious incidents continued to occur both in Dr. Hopkins' household and in that of his eldest son. He presumed that there was some link with the extraordinary visit, but he never heard from his visitor again. As for the New Jersey UFO Research Organization, no such institution exists. On the 24th of September 1976, only a few days after Dr. Herbert Hopkins' terrifying visit from a MIB, his daughter-in-law Maureen received a telephone call from a man who claimed to know her husband John, and who asked if he and a companion could come and visit them. John met the man at a local fast food restaurant, and brought him home with his companion, a woman. Both appeared to be in their mid-30s, and wore curiously old-fashioned clothes. The woman looked particularly odd. When she stood up, it seemed that there was something wrong with the way that her legs joined her hips. Both strangers walked with very short steps, leaning forward as though frightened of falling. They sat awkwardly together on a sofa while the man asked a number of detailed personal questions. Did John and Maureen watch television much? What did they read? And what did they talk about? All the while, the man was pawing and fondling his female companion, asking John if this was all right and whether he was doing it correctly. John left the room for a moment, and the man tried to persuade Maureen to sit next to him. He also asked her how she was made, and whether she had any nude photographs. Shortly afterwards, the woman stood up and announced that she wanted to leave. The man also stood, but made no move to go. He was between the woman and the door, and it seemed that the only way she could get to the door was by walking in a straight line, directly through him. Finally, the woman turned to John and asked, Please move him, I can't move him myself." Then, suddenly, the man left, followed by the woman, both walking in straight lines. They did not even say goodbye. The Unexplained, Orbis Publishing.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time. Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The following are the Mothman humanoid cryptid encounter reports collected by ufologist John Keel. The Mothman prophecies 2 years prior to the Silver Bridge collapsed on December 15, 1967. The bridge connected the towns of Point Pleasant, West Virginia and Gallipolis, Ohio over the Ohio River. Some of these reports are not from the area of the bridge collapse but seem to describe a similar entity. As well, some of the reports are from the general area of the bridge collapse but describe entities other than a Mothman-like being. Not all of these accounts were contained in the Mothman prophecies. Gallipolis, Ohio, early 1966 night, a woman who lived in a farm had reported her cattle being mutilated by unknown assailants. One night she went out armed with a shotgun to investigate and encountered several tall men wearing white coveralls. She chased them but they ran very fast and were able to easily jump over the fences. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, March 1966 daytime, a reliable woman said that she had observed a silver disc hovering above a Point Pleasant school. A male figure in a tight-fitting silver coverall was standing, floating outside the open door of the object in midair, gazing intently into the school playground. He had pointed features and shoulder-length hair. A similar object, she said, landed sometime later in the yard behind her home and was witnessed by her teenage children. A similar being was seen in this occasion as well. Salt Lake City, Utah, July 18, 1966, residents of this Mormon community reported seeing a bird about as big as a Piper Cub airplane circle the area. Some people ran for cover while others ran for their telephones. Scott, Mississippi, September 1, 1966 2 p.m. Mrs. James Eichert reported seeing what looked like a man fluttering about the sky. Several other people also said they had seen it. No other information. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, November 1, 1966, a National Guardsman saw a large brownish man-shaped figure on the limb of a tree. No other information. Gallipolis, Ohio, November 2, 1966 8 p.m. The witness was out behind her building getting ready to go home when there was a sudden flash directly above her. A large cylinder-shaped object then appeared and landed on the nearby parking lot. The object was completely silent, and the witness was unable to move as two men descended from the object and walked towards her. The men were normal-looking but heavily tanned with pointed